Pack your things and move to the basement, Mother. You're nearly done anyway. Those words came from my own son's mouth as his mistress stood beside him, smirking. I felt my world shatter that day. But what I did next left them both destroyed in ways they never saw coming. I'm glad you're here. Follow my story until the end, and comment the city you're watching from so I can see how far my story has reached. I never thought my own son would make me feel so worthless. At 70 years old, I thought I'd seen every kind of cruelty life could offer. But standing in the living room of the house I'd spent 40 years building, watching my son Damien and his mistress Colette move furniture around like I was already dead, I realized I was wrong. It was a Tuesday morning in late September when everything changed. The maple trees outside my window in Willowbrook, Oregon were just beginning to turn gold, the first hint of autumn creeping into the Pacific Northwest air. I was in my kitchen making coffee, the same routine I'd followed for decades, when I heard the front door open without a knock. "Damien?" I called out, surprised. My son had his own key, of course, but he usually called before visiting. "Yeah, Mom, it's me." His voice came from the entryway, but there was something different about his tone, harder, more distant. I walked into the living room and stopped short. Damien wasn't alone. Standing beside him, her hand possessively wrapped around his arm, was Colette Marchand, a woman I'd only met twice before and had hoped never to see again. Colette was 29 years old, nearly 20 years younger than my son, with the kind of calculated beauty that came from expensive salons and cosmetic procedures. Her honey blonde hair fell in perfect waves over her shoulders, and her designer clothes probably cost more than my monthly pension. She worked as a pharmaceutical sales representative, or so she claimed, though her real talent was identifying vulnerable men with assets worth pursuing. "Damien," I said carefully, my eyes moving between them, "I wasn't expecting you. Is everything all right?" "We need to talk, Mom," Damien said, and he didn't meet my eyes as he said it. That should have been my first warning. My son was 48 years old, tall and broad-shouldered like his father had been, with the same dark hair just beginning to show silver at the temples. He worked as a commercial real estate broker in Portland, about 40 minutes from Willowbrook, or at least he was supposed to be working. Lately, he'd been taking more and more time off, claiming he needed to think about his future. What he'd really been doing was destroying his marriage. "Of course," I said, gesturing to the couch. "Please sit down. Can I get you some coffee?" "This isn't a social visit," Colette said sharply, and something in her tone made my spine stiffen. Damien finally looked at me, and I barely recognized my son in those cold eyes. "Mom, we need to discuss some changes to the living situation here." My heart began to pound. "Changes? What kind of changes?" "Colette's pregnant," Damien said flatly, as if he were discussing a business transaction. "We're having a baby, due in March." The words should have filled me with joy. A grandchild, something I'd been hoping for since Damien had married Lydia 9 years ago. But instead of joy, I felt ice spreading through my chest. Because Damien was still married to Lydia. "Congratulations," I managed to whisper, though the word tasted like ash in my mouth. "Does Lydia know?" Damien's jaw tightened. "Lydia and I are getting divorced. The papers were filed last week." "Last week?" I couldn't hide my shock. "Damien, you've been married for 9 years. Lydia loves you. "Lydia is not your concern," Colette interrupted, stepping forward. Her perfume was overwhelming, some expensive scent that made my eyes water. "What matters now is the future, Damien's future, our baby's future." I looked at my son, searching his face for some sign of the boy I'd raised, the kind child who used to bring me dandelions from the yard and call them flowers, the teenager who'd cried in my arms when his high school girlfriend broke his heart, the young man who asked me to help him pick out Lydia's engagement ring because he wanted it to be perfect. That person seemed to have vanished entirely. "I'm very happy for you both," I said slowly, trying to process this information. But I'm not sure this has to do with changes to my living situation. Damien and Colette exchanged a look, and something passed between them that made my stomach clench with dread. "Mom, let's be realistic," Damien said, and his tone was the same one he used with difficult clients, condescending, patient in a way that wasn't really patient at all. "This house is too big for one person. It's 4 bedrooms, 3 bathrooms, almost 2,500 square feet. You're rattling around in here all alone." "I like my space," I said quietly. "Your father and I bought this house in 1983. We raised you here. Every room has memories." "Memories don't pay for maintenance," Colette said, pulling out her phone and scrolling through something. "I've been looking at your property records. The roof is 20 years old. The furnace is original to the house. The foundation has some settling issues on the east side. You're looking at probably $80,000 in necessary repairs over the next 5 years. I stared at her in disbelief. "You've been researching my house?"
"Someone has to think practically," she replied, not looking up from her phone. "Damien told me you've been letting things slide since Vernon died. That's understandable at your age, but it's not sustainable." At your age. The words stung more than they should have. Vernon, my late husband's name, sounded wrong in her mouth, like she had no right to speak it. Vernon Thorne had died 3 years ago from a sudden heart attack while working in the garden he loved. He was 68, too young, too vital, too present in my life one moment and gone the next. He'd left me the house outright in his will, along with his pension and life insurance. It wasn't a fortune, but it was enough for me to live comfortably, enough to maintain my independence and dignity in my old age. "I manage just fine," I said, hearing the defensive edge in my voice. "I have a handyman who helps with repairs, and I keep up with maintenance." "Mom, that's not the point," Damien said, and he was using that patient voice again, the one that made me feel like a child. "The point is that this house is wasted on one person. Colette and I need space. We're starting a family. We need a proper home, not the cramped condo I'm renting right now." The pieces were starting to fall into place, and the picture they formed made me feel sick. "You want to move in here," I said slowly, "with Colette." "Not exactly," Colette said, finally looking up from her phone with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "We want to take over the house. You would move to the basement." The world seemed to tilt on its axis. "The basement?" "It's actually quite spacious," Damien said quickly, as if that made it better. "Almost 600 square feet. We could partition off a bedroom area for you, add a small bathroom. It would be like your own little apartment." I thought of my basement, the unfinished space with concrete floors and exposed ceiling joists, the persistent dampness that made my arthritis ache whenever I went down there to do laundry, the spiders that built webs in every corner, no matter how often I swept them away. "You want me to live in the basement," I repeated, unable to fully process what they were suggesting. "Of my own house?" "Think of it as downsizing," Colette said brightly. "At your age, you don't really need much space anyway. A bedroom, a small sitting area, access to laundry, that's really all you require at this stage of life." At this stage of life, as if I were in hospice care rather than a healthy, active 70-year-old woman. "Damien," I turned to my son, desperately seeking some sign that he understood how insane this was. "You can't be serious. This is my home. Your father and I built our life here. This is where we celebrated your birthdays, where we had family dinners, where we had a life that's over now," Damien interrupted, and his voice was colder than I'd ever heard it. "Dad's dead, Mom. I'm sorry, but he is. You're living in the past, holding on to a house that's too big and too expensive for you to maintain alone. This arrangement makes sense for everyone." "Everyone?" I echoed. "How does moving me to the basement make sense for me?" "Because the alternative is selling the house. And then where would you go? Some assisted living facility? With your fixed income, you'd probably end up at Sunset Gardens or someplace similar. Have you seen those places? Shared rooms, institutional food, activities directors treating residents like children? She pulled up something else on her phone and showed me a photo of Sunset Gardens, a low-income senior facility on the outskirts of Willowbrook. I'd driven past it many times and always felt a chill of dread looking at the identical beige units surrounded by chain-link fencing. The residents sat outside in plastic chairs, staring at nothing, waiting to die. "I'm not going to an assisted living facility," I said, my voice shaking now. "I don't need assistance. I'm perfectly capable of living independently." "For how much longer?" Colette asked, and there was something almost triumphant in her voice. "You're 70 years old, Beatrice. You're nearly done anyway. How many more years can you realistically expect to manage a house this size? To handle the stairs? To deal with emergencies? What happens when you fall and break a hip? When you can't drive anymore? When you need help with basic daily tasks? You're nearly done anyway." The words hit me like a physical blow. I looked at my son, waiting for him to defend me, to tell his pregnant mistress that she couldn't speak to his mother that way, to show some shred of the decent person I thought I'd raised him. Instead, Damien nodded slowly. "She's not wrong, Mom. At your age, you need to start thinking practically about the future. The basement arrangement would actually be better for you. You wouldn't have to worry about stairs, and we'd be right upstairs if you needed help with anything." "I don't need help," I said, but my voice came out weaker than I intended. "I'm healthy. I'm active. I volunteer at the library twice a week. I have my garden club and my book club and my friends." "All of which you could continue doing from the basement," Colette said dismissively. "We're not suggesting you become a prisoner, just that you accept reality and make the most sensible choice for everyone involved." I looked around my living room, the space I decorated with care over decades. The walls were lined with family photos. Damien as a baby, as a gap-toothed second grader, in his high school graduation gown, on his wedding day with Lydia, Vernon and I on our 30th anniversary, Christmas mornings and birthday parties and ordinary moments that meant everything.
The built-in bookshelves Vernon had installed himself held my collection of novels and memoirs accumulated over a lifetime of reading. The armchair by the window was where I sat every morning with my coffee, watching the neighborhood come to life. The piano in the corner was where Damien had taken lessons as a child, where we'd sung carols at Christmas, where Vernon had played The Way You Look Tonight on our anniversary every year without fail. "I need time to think about this," I said quietly. "Don't think too long," Colette warned. "We need to start renovations within the next month if we want everything ready before the baby comes. The master bedroom needs to be completely redone. New paint, new carpet, a proper closet system. We'll need to convert one of the other bedrooms into a nursery. The kitchen is hopelessly outdated and needs a complete remodel." She was talking about gutting my house, about erasing every trace of the life Vernon and I had built together. "And obviously we'll need to make some changes to the decor," Colette said, waving dismissively at the family photos and the watercolor paintings I'd collected over the years. "Everything is so dated. We're thinking a more modern aesthetic, minimalist, clean lines." "Colette's very talented with interior design," Damien said, and there was pride in his voice that I'd never heard when he talked about Lydia. "She has an eye for these things." I felt tears burning behind my eyes, but refused to let them fall, not in front of this woman who was systematically dismantling my life, not in front of the son who was letting her do it. "How long do I have?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "To decide?" Colette glanced at Damien. "I'd say a week. We need to move forward with planning." "A week," I repeated numbly. "We're trying to be fair here, Mom," Damien said, and he actually sounded like he believed it. "We could just force the issue legally, but we're giving you a choice. The basement or Sunset Gardens. Either way, things are going to change." "Legally?" I looked at him sharply.
What do you mean legally? Damien shifted uncomfortably, and for the first time, Colette's confident expression flickered slightly. I'm listed as co-owner on the deed, remember? Dad added my name when he was sick to make sure I could handle the estate if anything happened to him. My blood ran cold. It was true. Vernon had been paranoid about legal complications after his first heart attack 5 years before he died. He'd wanted to make sure Damien could help me with financial matters if Vernon became incapacitated, so he'd added Damien's name to the house deed, making him a legal co-owner. At the time, it had seemed like a smart precaution. Now I realized it had given my son the power to force me out of my own home. That was supposed to protect me, I whispered, not give you leverage to kick me out. Nobody's kicking you out, Damien said, but his eyes slid away from mine. We're offering you a place to stay. The basement arrangement is generous, considering I have every legal right to sell my share of the house. If you did that, I'd have to sell too, I said, understanding the threat. I couldn't afford to buy out your half. Exactly, Colette said, and now her smile was openly triumphant. So really, the basement is your best option, unless you'd prefer Sunset Gardens, in which case we'd be happy to help you find a nice unit there. I looked at my son, this man I gave birth to, nursed through childhood illnesses, supported through every challenge and heartbreak of his life. The son I loved unconditionally from the moment I held him in my arms. And I saw a stranger. I need you both to leave now, I said quietly. Mom, Damien started, but I cut him off. Leave, please. I need to think. Don't think too long, Colette said when she collected her expensive handbag. We have contractors waiting to hear from us. The clock is ticking. They walked toward the door, and just before they left, Damien turned back to me. I know this is hard, Mom, he said, and for just a moment I thought I heard a trace of my real son in his voice. But it's what's best. You'll see that eventually. Then they were gone, and I was alone in my living room with the wreckage of my life scattered around me. I walked to the window and watched them get into Damien's black Mercedes SUV. Through the tinted glass, I could see Colette's hand moving possessively across Damien's thigh as she laughed about something. She looked back at my house once, and even from a distance, I could see the satisfaction in her expression. She thought she'd won. They both did. I stood there for a long time after they drove away, my reflection staring back at me from the window glass. I looked old, tired, defeated, a 70-year-old woman whose son had just told her she was nearly done anyway. But as I stood there, something began to shift inside me, something hard and cold and determined. I'd spent my entire life being accommodating, being nice, being the good mother, the supportive wife, the helpful neighbor. I'd worked double shifts as a surgical nurse to pay for Damien's college education. I'd given up my own dreams so he could pursue his. I'd welcomed Lydia into our family with open arms and defended Damien whenever they had marital troubles. And this is how he repaid me? I walked through my house room by room, looking at everything with new eyes. The hardwood floors Vernon and I refinished ourselves one long summer, the crown molding we installed together, him on the ladder while I held the pieces steady, the kitchen where we'd cooked thousands of meals, the bedroom where we'd slept side by side for 42 years.
This wasn't just a house. It was the physical manifestation of my entire adult life. Every nail, every paint color, every carefully chosen piece of furniture represented a decision Vernon and I had made together, a life we'd built with our own hands and hearts. And Damien thought he could take it from me because I was nearly done anyway? I stopped in Vernon's study, the one room I'd barely touched since his death. His desk still held his reading glasses and the mystery novel he'd been reading when he died, a bookmark still holding his place at chapter 7. His fishing photos covered one wall. His favorite cardigan still hung on the back of his chair, and sometimes, when I was feeling particularly lonely, I'd come in here and hold it, breathing in the faint scent of his cologne that still clung to the fabric. "What should I do?" I whispered to the empty room, to the ghost of my husband who wasn't there to answer. But maybe I already knew. Maybe I'd known from the moment Colette said those words. "You're nearly done anyway." I wasn't done, not even close. And if my son and his mistress thought they could push me out of my own life, they were about to learn a very painful lesson about underestimating a 70-year-old woman with nothing left to lose. I went to my bedroom and pulled out the locked box I kept in the back of my closet. Inside were all the important documents of my life: birth certificates, my nursing license, Vernon's death certificate, insurance papers, the deed to the house. I studied the deed carefully, reading the legal language Vernon's lawyer had drafted. Yes, Damien was listed as co-owner, but there were clauses, protections built in to prevent exactly the kind of situation I was now facing, provisions that required mutual consent for major decisions, language about primary residence and homestead rights. Vernon hadn't just added Damien's name randomly, he'd made sure I was protected. I spent the rest of that day going through every financial document I owned, every piece of paperwork related to the house and Vernon's estate, and as I read, a picture began to emerge, a picture that suggested my son and his mistress had made a very serious miscalculation. By evening, I'd made a decision. I wasn't going to fight this battle with tears and pleading. I wasn't going to roll over and accept whatever scraps they decided to throw me. I was going to fight, and I was going to win. Because if there was one thing my 45 years as a surgical nurse had taught me, it was this: you don't survive in an operating room by being weak. You survive by being precise, methodical, and absolutely ruthless when necessary. Damien and Colette thought they were dealing with a helpless old woman. They had no idea what was coming. I didn't sleep that night. How could I? Every time I closed my eyes, I heard Colette's voice, "You're nearly done anyway." I saw Damien's cold expression as he told me to move to the basement of my own home. I felt the crushing weight of betrayal settling over me like a shroud. At 3 a.m., I gave up pretending and went downstairs to make tea. The house was silent except for the familiar creaks and settling sounds that had become like a heartbeat to me over 4 decades. I sat at my kitchen table, the same oak table where Vernon and I had eaten breakfast together every morning for 42 years, and tried to make sense of what was happening. My son wanted to take my home, not just live in it, but possess it completely, relegating me to the basement like an unwanted piece of furniture too bothersome to throw away, but too guilt-inducing to abandon entirely. And his mistress, this woman half his age who'd known him less than a year, had looked me in the eye and told me I was nearly done anyway, as if my life and my value had an expiration date that she could see and I couldn't. The tea grew cold in my hands as I sat there, watching the sky gradually lighten through the kitchen window. The garden Vernon had loved so much was visible in the pre-dawn gray, the rose bushes he'd planted for our 20th anniversary, the stone pathway he'd laid by hand, the bench where we'd sat on summer evenings and talked about everything and nothing. By the time the sun fully rose, painting the Oregon sky in shades of pink and gold, I had made several decisions. First, I would not cry anymore. Tears were a luxury I couldn't afford, and they wouldn't change anything anyway. Second, I would not be passive. Whatever was going to happen, I would face it with my eyes open and my spine straight. Third, I needed to understand exactly what I was dealing with, and that meant I needed information. I showered and dressed carefully in navy plants and a cream blouse, my armor of respectability. At 70, I'd learned how you presented yourself mattered, especially when people were already inclined to dismiss you because of your age. I applied makeup with a steady hand, covering the sleepless circles under my eyes, and pinned my silver hair into a neat bun. Looking in the mirror, I saw the woman I'd been for most of my professional life, Beatrice Thorne, RN, surgical nurse. Competent, composed, capable of handling whatever crisis walked through the operating room doors. I would need every bit of that strength now.
My first stop was the Willowbrook County Recorder's Office. It opened at 8 a.m., and I was waiting outside the door when the clerk arrived to unlock it. "Good morning," I said pleasantly to the young woman behind the counter. Her name tag read Jessica. "I need to pull the property records for 847 Maplewood Drive. That's my home address." "Of course," Jessica said, typing into her computer. "Can I see some ID?" I handed over my driver's license, and a few minutes later she returned with a thick file of documents. I took them to one of the research tables and began reading carefully. Vernon had indeed added Damien as a co-owner in 2019, a year after his first heart attack. But as I read through the legal language, I discovered something interesting. The deed specified that the property was held as joint tenants with right of survivorship, with primary residence designated for Beatrice Thorne for her natural life. I read that clause 3 times to make sure I understood it correctly. Primary residence designated for Beatrice Thorne for her natural life. That meant that as long as I was alive, I had the right to live in the house as my primary residence. Damien couldn't force me out without my consent, even as a co-owner. Vernon had protected me after all. But there was more. Attached to the deed was a document I didn't remember seeing before, a codicil added by Vernon just 2 months before his death. It stated that in the event of any dispute over the property, the matter would be decided by arbitration, and that any attempt to force the sale of the property against my wishes would result in Damien's ownership share being automatically transferred to me. Vernon had known. Somehow he'd known that I might need protection even from our own son. I felt tears threatening again, but pushed them back. This was good news. This meant I had legal protection. But I needed to understand why Damien thought he could force me out if these protections existed, unless he didn't know about them. I pulled out my phone and called Margaret Chen, the attorney who had handled Vernon's estate. She'd been his lawyer for 20 years, and I trusted her completely. "Beatrice," Margaret answered warmly. "How are you? I haven't heard from you in months." "I'm well, Margaret, or at least I was until yesterday. I need to ask you something important about Vernon's estate documents." "Of course. What's troubling you?" I explained the situation quickly. Damien's demand that I move to the basement, his threat to force a sale of the property, Colette's cruel dismissal of my rights. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. When Margaret spoke again, her voice had lost its warmth and become professionally sharp. "Beatrice, I need you to listen to me very carefully. The protections Vernon put in place are ironclad. Damien cannot force you out of that house. He cannot compel a sale. And if he tries, he will lose his ownership stake entirely. Did he tell you he could do these things?" Yes, he said that because he's a co-owner, he has the legal right to sell his share and that I couldn't afford to buy him out. That's technically true, he could sell his share, but whoever bought it would be buying into a property where you have lifetime residence rights. No one in their right mind would purchase that. And more importantly, any attempt to force you out or make your living situation untenable would trigger the codicil Vernon added. Damien would lose everything. Margaret, does Damien know about these protections? Another pause. He should. He was present when we went through the estate documents after Vernon died. I explained all of this in detail. But had he been listening? I remembered that meeting, held in Margaret's office just 2 weeks after Vernon's funeral. I'd been in a fog of grief, barely able to focus. Damien was there, but he'd spent most of the meeting on his phone, nodding absently whenever Margaret asked if he understood something. I think he might not have been paying attention, I said slowly, or he's counting on me not knowing about the protections. Either way, you need to set him straight immediately. And Beatrice, I think you should come to my office today. We need to review everything and make sure you understand exactly what your rights are. Can you come at 2? I'll be there. I hung up and sat back in my chair, my mind racing. Damien either didn't know about the protections Vernon had put in place, or he was deliberately lying to me, hoping I wouldn't check. Either option made my son look bad, but the second one made him look worse. And then there was Colette, the woman who'd researched my property records and knew about the foundation issues and the age of the roof. She'd done her homework on the house's physical condition. Had she also researched the legal status of the deed? I gathered up the property records and thanked Jessica, then walked out into the bright September morning. But instead of heading home, I drove to downtown Portland, to the building where Damien worked. Cascade Commercial Realty occupied the 15th floor of a glass and steel tower overlooking the Willamette River. I'd been there only once before, for Damien's 40th birthday party that his firm had thrown for him. That felt like a lifetime ago now. The receptionist looked up as I entered, her professional smile in place. "Good morning. Do you have an appointment?" "No, but I'm Damien Thorne's mother. I was hoping to speak with him briefly." "I'm sorry, but Mr. Thorne called in this morning. He's taking a personal day." "I see. Is his assistant available?"
Janet? Yes, she's here. Let me check if she can see you. She picked up the phone, spoke briefly, then nodded to me. Janet says to come on back. Second office on the right. I found Janet Reeves at her desk, surrounded by files and a computer screen displaying what looked like property listings. She was in her mid-40s, professionally dressed, with tired eyes that suggested she'd been dealing with more than her share of stress lately. "Mrs. Thorne," she said, standing to shake my hand, "it's nice to see you again. I'm sorry Damien isn't here. Is there something I can help you with?" "Actually, Janet, I was hoping you might be able to help me understand something. Has Damien been taking a lot of personal days lately?" Janet's expression became carefully neutral. "I can't really discuss Mr. Thorne's schedule." "Please," I interrupted gently. "I'm not trying to get him in trouble. I'm his mother, and I'm worried about him. He's going through a divorce, and I think he's making some poor decisions. If you could just give me a general sense of how he's been doing at work, I would appreciate it." Something in my tone must have reached her, because Janet's professional mask slipped slightly. "Mrs. Thorne, I've worked for Damien for 6 years. He's always been reliable, hardworking, dedicated to his clients. But over the past 8 months, she trailed off, clearly uncomfortable. "Please," I said again, "I need to know." Janet sighed. "He's been absent a lot. Personal days, long lunches that turn into whole afternoons, client meetings that don't seem to exist when I check the calendar.
His performance has dropped significantly. He's lost 2 major accounts because he missed important deadlines. Mr. Cascade, that's the owner, has spoken to him twice about his attendance and performance issues. My heart sank. Is his job in jeopardy? I think so, yes. Mr. Cascade is patient, but there are limits. And Mrs. Thorne, Janet leaned forward, lowering her voice. The woman he's been seeing, Colette, she comes to the office sometimes to pick him up for lunch. She's not popular with the staff. She's rude to the receptionist, dismissive of me, and she acts like she owns the place. Last week, she actually took a call in the middle of the lobby and was talking loudly about redecorating someone's house, how everything was dated and needed to be gutted. People were staring. Did she mention whose house? Janet nodded slowly. She mentioned Willowbrook and something about getting an old woman out of the way. I'm sorry, Mrs. Thorne. I probably shouldn't have said anything, but I liked Lydia. She was always kind to me. And I hate seeing Damien throw away his marriage and his career for someone like Colette. I thanked Janet and left the office, my mind whirling. So Damien's professional life was falling apart along with his personal life. That explained why he might be desperate for money. If he was about to lose his job, he'd need financial security. And what better source than a house worth at least $600,000 in the current market? But there was something else nagging at me. Colette had been loud about her plans. She'd been brazen enough to discuss them in Damien's workplace, where anyone could overhear. That suggested extreme arrogance or extreme confidence that she'd already won. I needed to know more about Colette Marchand. Back home, I made myself a sandwich that I barely tasted and opened my laptop. I'd never been particularly skilled with social media, but I knew the basics. I found Colette's Instagram account easily enough. She used her full name and her profile was public. What I saw there made my stomach turn. Colette's feed was a carefully curated display of luxury and aspiration, designer handbags, expensive restaurants, exotic vacations, and recently a series of posts that made my blood run cold. 3 weeks ago, a photo of a positive pregnancy test with the caption, "Best surprise ever, baby Marchand coming March 2025. 2 weeks ago, a photo of a house, my house, taken from the street with the caption, "Future renovations coming soon. Can't wait to make this place our dream home. Out with the old, in with the new." 1 week ago, a photo of paint swatches and fabric samples, captioned, "Nursery planning, thinking soft gray walls with white furniture, minimalist and modern, none of that dated floral grandma stuff." She'd been planning this for weeks, maybe months, and she'd been broadcasting it publicly, confident enough in her victory that she didn't care who knew about her plans. I scrolled further back, into the months before the pregnancy announcement, and found the beginning of her relationship with Damien. Photos of them together at upscale restaurants, wine bars, weekend getaways. The first photo was dated February, 8 months ago. But there was something odd about the earlier posts. Before Damien appeared in her feed, Colette's lifestyle was less flashy, fewer designer items, more modest locations. And there were photos with another man, someone older, distinguished looking. The photos with him ended abruptly in January, and by February, Damien had taken his place. I clicked on one of the photos with the older man and checked the tags. His name was Marcus Whitfield, and according to his profile, he was a real estate developer in Seattle, wealthy, married. And his last post was December, announcing that he was focusing on family and stepping back from social media. The pattern was becoming clear. Colette had a type, successful men with assets, preferably married men who could be manipulated without the complications of a committed relationship. She'd been with Marcus Whitfield until something went wrong, maybe his wife found out, maybe he cut her off, and then she'd moved on to Damien.
But Damien was different from Marcus in one crucial way. Marcus had his own money. Damien's wealth was mostly tied up in a house he co-owned with his mother, a house that Colette wanted. I was about to close the laptop when I noticed something in one of Colette's recent photos. It was a casual shot, taken in what looked like a coffee shop, Colette smiling at the camera with a latte in front of her. But in the background, reflected in the mirror behind her, was another table where two people sat together. One of them was Damien, the other was a woman I didn't recognize, but judging by the briefcase open on the table between them and the documents they were examining, it looked like a business meeting. I zoomed in on the photo, trying to make out any details. The documents were too blurry to read, but I could see that they had official-looking headers. Legal documents, maybe? I saved the photo and then opened a new browser window to search for real estate lawyers in Portland. On the third page of results, I found a law firm called Hartman and Associates, specializing in property law and estate planning. On a hunch, I called their office. Hartman and Associates, how may I direct your call? Yes, hello. I'm trying to confirm an appointment for my son, Damien Thorne. I believe he may have met with one of your attorneys recently, but he didn't write down the details. Could you check your records? There was a pause and the sound of typing. Yes, Mr. Thorne has been working with Sandra Hartman on a property matter. His next appointment is scheduled for Friday at 10 a.m. My heart was pounding. Could you tell me what kind of property matter? I'm sorry, I can't disclose client information. You'd need to speak with Mr. Thorne or Miss Hartman directly. I thanked her and hung up, my hands shaking slightly. Damien had hired a real estate attorney. He was actively working on something related to property, and given our conversation yesterday, I could guess what that something was. He was trying to find a legal way to force me out of my house. The phone rang, making me jump. I checked the caller ID. It was Lydia, Damien's soon-to-be ex-wife. Lydia, I answered, trying to keep my voice steady. How are you? Lydia's voice was thick with tears. Beatrice, I'm sorry to bother you. I know things are complicated right now, but I didn't know who else to call. I just got served with divorce papers this morning. Oh, Lydia, I'm so sorry. Did you know about Colette? About the baby? I couldn't lie to her. I found out yesterday, Damien told me. He didn't even have the decency to tell me himself about the pregnancy. I had to read it in the divorce filing. Irreconcilable differences due to wife's inability to conceive. Her voice broke. Beatrice, we never even tried. We've only been married 9 years. We were waiting until his career was more established, until we had better financial stability. And now he's divorcing me because I can't give him a child I never had the chance to give him? Lydia, this isn't your fault. None of this is your fault. He's demanding half of everything in the divorce, half of my retirement account, half of my savings, half the value of my car. And, Beatrice, he wants me to sign a waiver giving up any claim to his future inheritance. Specifically, he wants me to acknowledge that I have no interest in the Maplewood Drive property. The pieces were falling into place. Damien wasn't just divorcing Lydia, he was protecting my ownership of my house from any claim she might make in the divorce settlement. Don't sign anything, I said urgently, not until you've had a lawyer review every word. And, Lydia, I think Damien might be in some financial trouble. His assistant told me his job performance has been slipping. He might be counting on my house as his only real asset. What do you mean? I explained what had happened yesterday, Damien and Colette's demand that I move to the basement, their threats about assisted living facilities, Colette's cruel words about me being nearly done anyway. Lydia was silent for a long moment. When she spoke again, her voice was hard with anger. Beatrice, listen to me. I've suspected for months that something wasn't right. Damien has been secretive about money, defensive whenever I asked about our finances. I tried to check our joint accounts last week, and he'd removed my access. I think he's been hiding assets, maybe even hiding debt. And if he's desperate enough to try to force you out of your own home, there's something seriously wrong. What should I do? First, see that lawyer today. Make sure you understand all your rights. Second, don't believe anything Damien tells you about his financial situation or his legal rights. Make him prove everything. And third, Lydia, her voice became steel. Don't let them win, Beatrice. Don't let them feel like you're worthless just because you're older. You raised Damien. You gave him everything. You deserve better than this. We talked for a few more minutes, Lydia sharing details about the divorce proceedings and promising to keep me updated. When we hung up, I felt a strange sense of solidarity. Both of us had been betrayed by Damien in different ways, and both of us had been dismissed as obstacles to their new life with Colette. But neither of us was going down without a fight.
At 2 p.m., I sat in Margaret Chen's office, going through every document related to Vernon's estate and my ownership of the house. Margaret explained each protection Vernon had put in place, each clause designed to keep me safe. The bottom line, Margaret said, is that Damien cannot force you out. He can make noise, he can make threats, but legally he has no power to remove you from that house during your lifetime. And if he tries to make your life so miserable that you leave voluntarily, that's considered constructive eviction, and it would trigger the codicil. He'd lose his ownership stake entirely. What if he doesn't know about the codicil? Then we need to inform him, preferably in writing, from me as your attorney. That way there's no ambiguity. Margaret leaned forward, her expression serious. Beatrice, I'm going to ask you something difficult. Do you want to keep Damien as a co-owner? Because based on what you've told me about his behavior and his plans, we could make a case for removing him now, before things get worse. I thought about my son. The little boy who used to crawl into my lap when he had nightmares, the teenager who'd called me from college every Sunday without fail, the young man who'd wept at his father's funeral and told me he'd always take care of me. That person seemed to be gone, replaced by someone I didn't recognize, someone who could look at his mother and see nothing but an inconvenient obstacle. Not yet, I said quietly. I want to give him one more chance to come to his senses. But Margaret, I want you to draw up all the paperwork we'd need to remove him. Have it ready, just in case. Consider it done. I left Margaret's office with a folder full of documents and a clearer understanding of my legal position. I was protected. Vernon had made sure of that. But the law could only do so much against a son who seemed determined to betray me. When I got home, there was a car I didn't recognize parked in my driveway. My heart sank as I saw Damien and Colette standing on my front porch, and this time they weren't alone. A man in work clothes stood with them, holding a clipboard. "Mom," Damien called out as I got out of my car. "Perfect timing. This is Rick Hernandez. He's a contractor. We wanted him to look at the basement and give us an estimate on the renovation." "I didn't agree to any renovation," I said carefully. Colette laughed. "We're just getting information, Beatrice. Surely you can't object to that." But the way she said it, the way she emphasized my name with subtle condescension, made it clear that she didn't really care whether I objected or not. The contractor looked uncomfortable. "Mr. Thorne called me this morning, said his mother needed some accessibility improvements in the basement. I didn't realize this was complicated." "It's not complicated," Damien said firmly. "My mother is just adjusting to the idea. Mom, can Rick take a look at the basement? 5 minutes, that's all." I looked at my son, really looked at him, searching for any sign that he understood how wrong this was. But all I saw was impatience and determination. "No," I said quietly but firmly. "Rick, I'm sorry you were brought here under false pretenses, but I haven't authorized any work on my home, and I won't be doing so. Damien, I need to speak with you and Colette, privately." Rick nodded quickly, clearly relieved to escape the situation. "No problem, ma'am. I'll wait for your call if things change." He headed to his truck and drove away, leaving the three of us standing in my driveway. "That was embarrassing," Colette said sharply. "We could have had estimates ready to go. Now we're wasting time." "We need to talk," I said, pulling the folder Margaret had given me from my purse. "Inside, now." Damien and Colette exchanged glances, but they followed me into the house. I led them to the dining room and spread the documents out on the table. I saw my lawyer today, Margaret Chen. She explained some things to me that I think you need to understand. I watched Damien's face carefully as I explained the lifetime residence clause, the protections against forced sale, and most importantly, the codicil that would strip him of his ownership if he tried to force me out. His face went pale as I talked, and by the time I finished, he looked genuinely shocked. I didn't know about that codicil, he said slowly. Dad never mentioned it. He added it 2 months before he died. Margaret says you were present when she explained it after the funeral. I was grieving, Damien said defensively. I wasn't paying attention to every legal detail. I just assumed. You assumed wrong, I interrupted. Damien, your father loved you, but he loved me more. He made sure I would be protected. You can't force me out of this house. You can't make me move to the basement. And if you try to make my life so miserable that I leave voluntarily, you'll lose everything. Colette's face had gone from confident to calculating. I could practically see her reassessing the situation, looking for angles and loopholes. There has to be a way around this. No legal document is airtight. We'll get our own lawyer and we'll find... You already have a lawyer, I said quietly. Sandra Hartman and Associates. I know about your appointment on Friday, Damien. I know you've been consulting with a real estate attorney, but I'm telling you right now, you're wasting your time and your money. The protections are ironclad. Damien's shock was giving way to anger. You've been investigating me, calling my office, checking my appointments? What gives you the right? What gives you the right? I shot back, and I was surprised by the strength in my own voice. You came into my home yesterday and told me I was nearly done anyway. You threatened to put me in a basement like I'm some kind of unwanted furniture. You brought a contractor to my house without my permission, and you want to talk about rights? This house is half mine, Damien said, his voice rising. Dad gave it to me. I have every right. You have the rights Dad gave you, nothing more and nothing less. And he made very sure that those rights didn't include the ability to hurt me. I stood up, gathering the documents. I'm giving you one chance, Damien, one chance to walk away from this plan, to treat me with the respect I deserve as your mother, and to remember who you used to be before Colette came into your life. This is my life, Damien said. My choice, my future. Then you're choosing wrong. Colette stood up abruptly. This is ridiculous. Come on, Damien. We don't need to listen to this. We'll find another way. There is no other way, I said, looking directly at her. And Colette, I know about Marcus Whitfield. I know your pattern. You find successful men, you get pregnant, and you try to cash in. But Damien doesn't have the assets you think he does. His job is in jeopardy, his marriage is ending and costing him money. All he really has is his share of this house. And I just showed you that share is worth nothing as long as I'm alive. Colette's face flushed with anger. You don't know anything about me. I know enough, and I know that whatever future you think you're building with my son, it's built on lies and manipulation. The question is, how long before Damien figures that out? Damien grabbed Colette's arm. Let's go. This is pointless. They headed for the door, but Damien turned back one last time. I'm still your son, Mom. That has to count for something. It does, I said softly. It counts enough that I'm giving you this warning, instead of just letting you destroy yourself. But Damien, if you keep going down this path, if you keep trying to take my home and my dignity, being your son won't protect you anymore. Dad made sure of that. They left, and I stood in my dining room, shaking with adrenaline and emotion. I'd stood up to them. I'd shown them I wasn't the helpless old woman they thought I was. But I also knew this wasn't over, not by a long shot. People like Colette didn't give up easily, and Damien, whatever his faults, had inherited his father's stubbornness. They would regroup, they would strategize, they would look for weaknesses and ways around my defenses, and I needed to be ready for them. As evening fell, I sat in Vernon's study, in his chair, surrounded by his things. I pulled out my phone and sent a text to Margaret Chen. Prepare all removal documents. I might need them sooner than I thought. Then I sat in the growing darkness and prepared myself for whatever came next. Because if my son and his mistress wanted a war, I would give them one, and I would make damn sure that when it was over, they understood exactly what it cost to underestimate a woman who was nearly done anyway. 3 days after confronting Damien and Colette with the legal documents, I received an email that changed everything. It came at 6:47 a.m. on a Saturday morning, and at first I almost deleted it thinking it was spam. The sender was listed as a friend, and the subject line read, "You need to see this about Colette Marchand." I hesitated, my finger hovering over the delete button. It could be malware, it could be a scam, but something made me click it open. Inside was a single line of text. Check the attached documents carefully. Your son is in more danger than you know. This isn't her first time. Attached were 3 PDF files. My heart pounding, I downloaded them to my desktop and opened the first one. It was a police report from Seattle dated 18 months ago. The complainant was Marcus Whitfield, the same man I'd seen in Colette's old Instagram photos. The report detailed allegations of financial fraud, identity theft, and extortion. According to the report, Colette had convinced Marcus to give her access to several of his business accounts under the pretense of helping him manage his investments. Over a period of 6 months, she'd transferred nearly $200,000 to accounts she controlled. But the most damning detail was this. Colette had claimed to be pregnant with Marcus's child. She'd used the pregnancy to manipulate him, to extract money for medical expenses and preparing for the baby. When Marcus finally demanded to attend a doctor's appointment with her, she'd admitted the pregnancy was fake. She'd been using photos and ultrasound images stolen from other women's social media accounts. Marcus had filed charges, but according to the notes in the report, Colette had returned most of the money, and the case had been settled out of court with a non-disclosure agreement. The charges were dropped, and Colette walked away with a clean record and approximately $40,000 that Marcus couldn't prove she had taken. I sat back in my chair, my hands trembling. The pregnancy. Was Colette's pregnancy with Damien's child even real? I opened the second PDF. This one was a court filing from California dated 3 years ago, a civil suit brought by a man named Richard Torres against Colette Marchand for fraud and breach of contract. The details were similar. Colette had started a relationship with Richard, claimed to be pregnant, convinced him to invest in a business opportunity she was developing, and then disappeared with $75,000 of his money. This time, the pregnancy had turned out to be real, but Colette had miscarried, or claimed to have miscarried, in her second trimester. Richard had pursued the lawsuit anyway, but Colette had declared bankruptcy, and he had been unable to recover the money.
The third document was the most recent and the most chilling. It was a restraining order filed just 11 months ago by a woman named Patricia Chen in Vancouver, Washington, just across the river from Portland. Patricia's sworn statement described how Colette had befriended her, learned that Patricia's elderly mother had recently died, leaving a substantial estate, and then attempted to manipulate Patricia's grieving father into a relationship. When Patricia confronted Colette, Colette had become threatening, showing up at Patricia's workplace and home, making veiled threats about what would happen if Patricia got in the way of her future. The restraining order had been granted, prohibiting Colette from coming within 500 feet of Patricia or her father. I read through all 3 documents twice, my mind reeling. Colette wasn't just a gold digger or an opportunist, she was a systematic con artist with a pattern of targeting vulnerable men, manipulating them with fake or real pregnancies, and extracting as much money as possible before moving on to the next mark. And my son was her latest target. But who had sent me these documents? I checked the email again, but there was no additional information, just those 3 files and that cryptic message. I picked up my phone and called Margaret Chen. Beatrice, it's not even 7 in the morning. Is everything all right? Margaret, I need you to look at something. I'm forwarding you an email I just received. It contains information about Colette Marchand that changes everything. I heard the sound of Margaret's computer booting up. Send it now, I'm looking. I forwarded the email and waited while Margaret reviewed the documents. The silence on the other end of the line stretched so long that I started to worry we'd been disconnected. Margaret, are you still there? I'm here. Beatrice, where did you get these? Someone sent them anonymously, someone who signed the email as a friend. Do you think they're real? I can verify them. Give me an hour. These are court documents, police reports. If they're authentic, they'll be in the public record. I'll check. But Beatrice, if these are real, we need to get this information to Damien immediately. Will he believe it? He's so caught up in this fantasy with her. He'll have to believe it when it comes from official sources. Stay by your phone. I'll call you back. Margaret hung up, and I sat in my kitchen as the morning sun rose higher, casting long shadows through the windows. I made coffee that I didn't drink. I tried to eat toast that turned to dust in my mouth. All I could think about was Damien, my son who had been so cruel to me, who had tried to take my home, who had said such terrible things, walking into a trap that could destroy him completely. Because that's what Colette was, not just a con artist, but a trap. And Damien was so blinded by infatuation or midlife crisis or whatever had seized hold of him that he couldn't see the danger. 53 minutes later, Margaret called back. It's all real. Every document is authentic. I pulled the court records myself. Beatrice, this woman is dangerous, not just financially dangerous. That restraining order in Vancouver suggests she might be capable of violence if she doesn't get what she wants. What do we do? First, I'm going to call Lydia. She needs to know about this. It could be relevant to the divorce proceedings. Second, I think we need to confront Damien with this information, but not alone. He needs to hear this from multiple people he trusts, and he needs to hear it in a setting where he can't just walk away. He won't come if he knows I'm there, not after our last confrontation. Then we don't tell him you're there. Beatrice, do you trust Lydia? Yes, completely. Then here's what I'm thinking. Lydia calls Damien and tells him she wants to meet to discuss the divorce settlement. She suggests neutral ground, my office. She doesn't mention that you'll be there or that we have this information. Once he's here, we present the evidence together. What if he still doesn't believe it? Then we make sure his divorce attorney sees it. We make sure anyone he's borrowed money from sees it. We make sure Colette knows that we know. The goal isn't just to convince Damien, it's to protect him from whatever Colette is planning next. Do you think the pregnancy is real? Margaret was quiet for a moment. I don't know, but given her history, I think we need to find out, and I think we need to find out fast. The plan came together quickly. Margaret called Lydia, who agreed immediately despite her anger at Damien. He's still my husband, Lydia said when I spoke with her later that morning, even if he doesn't want to be. I won't let him be destroyed by someone like her. Lydia called Damien and, according to her report, he'd been reluctant but agreed to meet on Monday afternoon at Margaret's office. He thought they were meeting to negotiate the divorce settlement. He had no idea what was waiting for him. Sunday passed in a blur of nervous energy. I couldn't focus on anything. I tried to garden but abandoned the work after 10 minutes. I tried to read but couldn't make sense of the words on the page. I tried to watch television, but everything seemed frivolous and meaningless compared to what was happening to my family. Late Sunday evening, my doorbell rang. I looked through the peephole and saw Lydia standing on my porch holding a bottle of wine. I thought you might need company, she said when I opened the door, and I know I do. We sat in my living room, the room where this nightmare started, and talked for hours. Lydia told me about Damien's marriage, the good years and the slow decline, how he'd started working longer hours, becoming distant and irritable, how she'd suggested counseling and he'd refused, how she'd sensed something was wrong but had convinced herself it was just stress from work.
"I keep thinking about what I could have done differently," Lydia said, tears streaming down her face. "If I'd pushed harder for therapy, if I'd been more attentive, if I'd—" "None of this is your fault," I interrupted firmly. "Lydia, you were a good wife to him. You loved him. You supported him. You tried to work things out. He's the one who chose to have an affair. He's the one who chose to believe Colette's lies. Those were his choices, not yours." "Do you think we can save him?" she asked quietly. "Tomorrow, when we show him the evidence, do you think he'll see the truth?" I thought about my son, the stubborn, proud man who hated admitting he was wrong about anything, the man who had looked at me 3 days ago and called me a burden, the man who had chosen Colette over his wife, his mother, and his own integrity. "I don't know," I admitted, "but we have to try." Monday morning arrived cold and gray, with clouds promising rain. I dressed carefully in a navy suit I'd bought for Vernon's funeral and hadn't worn since. Armor, I thought. I'm putting on armor for battle. Margaret's office was in downtown Willowbrook, in a converted Victorian house that had been subdivided into professional suites. I arrived early and sat in the waiting room, my hands folded in my lap, trying to appear calm, even though my heart was racing. Lydia arrived next, looking pale but determined. She sat beside me and took my hand. "Whatever happens," she said, "we did the right thing." "I hope so." At 2 p.m. exactly, Damien walked through the door. He stopped short when he saw me sitting there next to Lydia. "What is this? Lydia, you said this was about the divorce settlement." "It is," Margaret said, appearing in the doorway to her office. "But it's also about something much more important. Damien, please come in. We have information you need to see." "If Mom's here, I'm not interested in whatever ambush you've planned." "Damien," Lydia said, standing up, "please, I'm asking you as your wife, soon-to-be ex-wife, but still your wife, to listen. Just listen. If after you hear what we have to say, you still want to walk out, I won't stop you." Something in Lydia's tone must have reached him, because for a moment's hesitation, Damien followed us into Margaret's office. We all sat down, Margaret behind her desk, Lydia and I on one side, Damien on the other. The documents were already laid out on Margaret's desk, face down. "Damien," Margaret began, "what I'm about to show you is difficult, but it's important that you see it. 3 days ago, someone sent your mother evidence about Colette Marchand's past. I've verified that everything in these documents is authentic and part of the public record." "What kind of evidence?" Damien's voice was wary. Margaret turned over the first document, the police report from Seattle. "This is a report filed by Marcus Whitfield 18 months ago, alleging that Colette defrauded him of nearly $200,000. She gained access to his accounts by claiming she was pregnant with his child. The pregnancy turned out to be fake." Damien's face went white as he read. "This can't be the same Colette. It's a common name." "It's her," Margaret said quietly, turning over the second document. "Here's a civil lawsuit from 3 years ago in California. Same pattern, fake pregnancy, fraud, theft. And this," she turned over the restraining order, "is from less than a year ago. A woman in Vancouver had to get a restraining order because Colette became threatening when she was prevented from manipulating her elderly father." Damien picked up the restraining order, his hands shaking. I watched him read through it, watched the color drain from his face, watched something break behind his eyes. "The pregnancy," he whispered. "Colette's pregnancy. Is it real?" "We don't know," I said gently, "but given her history—" "It's real," Damien said. "I've been to doctor's appointments with her. I've seen the ultrasounds." "Damien," Lydia said carefully, Did you ever speak to the doctor directly, or did Colette handle all the communication? She handled it. She said it was easier since she was already a patient there. But I was in the room. I saw. He stopped, something occurring to him. I saw images on a screen. The doctor, I never actually spoke to the doctor. Colette always stepped out to talk to them privately. She said it was about discussing private medical details. Margaret pulled up something on her computer and turned the screen toward Damien. This is Colette's Instagram account from 2 years ago. Look at this post. It was an ultrasound image with the caption, "So blessed, baby arriving soon." But when I looked at the date, it was from the period when Colette had been involved with Richard Torres, the pregnancy that had supposedly ended in miscarriage. She could have used this same image with you, or found similar images online. Damien, I'm not saying the pregnancy definitely isn't real, but you need to demand proof, real proof. A DNA test after the baby is born, direct communication with the medical team, verified documentation. Damien was staring at the documents spread across Margaret's desk, his expression one of growing horror. "The house," he said slowly. "She wanted Mom's house. She kept pushing for me to get the house, to force Mom out. She said we needed space for the baby, that Mom was being unreasonable, that—" He looked up at me, and for the first time in months, I saw my real son in his eyes. "Oh, God! Mom, what have I done?"
Damien, I started, but he stood up abruptly. "I need to go. I need to talk to Colette. I need to—" "No," Margaret said firmly. "Damien, sit down. If you confront Colette directly with this information, especially if she's the dangerous person these documents suggest she is, you could be putting yourself at risk. We need to handle this carefully." "What do you suggest?" Damien's voice was hollow. "First, you need to secure your assets, today, right now. Any accounts she has access to, any credit cards she can use, anything she could liquidate or steal. Cut off her access immediately." "She has my credit cards. She uses my car sometimes. She has keys to my condo." "Change the locks, cancel the cards, report the car as stolen if she doesn't return it." "Damien, I know this is harsh, but you need to protect yourself." "What about the baby, if there is a baby?" "We'll deal with that when we know for sure, but right now you need to assume that everything Colette has told you might be a lie." Damien looked at Lydia, and there was such pain in his expression that I had to look away. "I destroyed our marriage for this," he said quietly. "I threw away 9 years for a woman who's been lying to me from the beginning." "We don't know that she's been lying about everything," Lydia said, and there was an unexpected gentleness in her voice. "But we know she's capable of it, and that's enough to make you be careful." Damien turned to me. "Mom, I'm so sorry. The things I said to you, the way I treated you—" "We'll deal with that later," I said, fighting back tears. "Right now, we need to make sure you're safe." What happened over the next 3 hours was a whirlwind of activity. Damien called his bank and credit card companies, canceling Colette's access to everything. He called a locksmith and arranged for his condo locks to be changed immediately. He called his insurance company and reported that his car might be in the possession of someone who shouldn't have it. And then he called Colette. We all listened as he put the call on speaker. "Damien, where are you? I've been trying to reach you all afternoon." "I'm at my lawyer's office. We need to talk." "About what? Is this about the house again? Because I've been thinking, and I really think we should—" "It's not about the house. Colette, I need you to answer something honestly. Are you really pregnant?" There was a pause. "What kind of question is that? Of course I'm pregnant. You've seen the ultrasounds." "I've seen pictures on a screen, but I've never spoken directly to your doctor. I've never seen any actual medical records with your name on them. I want to go to your next appointment with you, and I want to speak to the doctor myself." Another pause, longer this time. "Damien, you're being ridiculous. Why are you suddenly questioning this? Who have you been talking to?" "It doesn't matter who I've been talking to. What matters is that you answer the question.
Will you let me speak directly to your doctor? Go to hell, Damien. The line went dead. We all sat in silence for a moment, the echo of Colette's anger hanging in the air. Well, Margaret said finally, that tells us something. It tells us she's lying, Fonny said flatly. A woman who's really pregnant wouldn't refuse to let the father verify it. She'd be offended, maybe, but she wouldn't just hang up. What do we do now? I asked. Now we wait and see what she does next. Damien, you need to be prepared for her to escalate. Based on that restraining order, we know she's capable of becoming threatening when she doesn't get what she wants. Should we file for a restraining order? Not yet. We don't have evidence of threats or harassment, but document everything. Every call, every text, every interaction. If she shows up at your home or workplace, if she contacts you in any way that feels threatening, document it. Damien nodded numbly. He looked like a man who'd just woken up from a nightmare only to realize that his waking life was even worse. Mom, Damien said, turning to me, can we talk, privately? Margaret and Lydia stepped out of the office, leaving us alone. For a long moment, Damien and I just looked at each other across the desk. I don't know how to apologize for what I've done. The things I said to you, the way I tried to force you out of your home, telling you that you were nearly done anyway, his voice broke. I don't recognize the person I became. It's like I was under a spell or something. I know that sounds crazy, but it doesn't sound crazy, I said quietly. Damien, Colette is very good at manipulation. She knew exactly what buttons to push, exactly how to make you feel like you needed her, like she was the only one who understood you. That's what con artists do. I hurt you. I hurt Lydia. I nearly destroyed my career, all for a woman who was probably planning to rob me blind and disappear. Yes, you did all of those things. And, Damien, I'm still angry about it. I'm angry and I'm hurt, and I don't know if our relationship can recover from what you said to me. He flinched, as if I'd struck him. I understand.
But, I continued, you're still my son, and you're in danger. So we'll deal with the hurt feelings later. Right now, we focus on making sure you're safe and that Colette doesn't destroy what's left of your life. What if the baby is real? Then we'll deal with that too. You'll be a father, and we'll figure out how to co-parent with someone like Colette. But Damien, even if the baby is real, that doesn't mean you owe Colette anything beyond child support. You don't owe her a relationship. You don't owe her access to my house. You don't owe her the life she was trying to build on the foundation of lies and manipulation. He nodded, tears streaming down his face. I'm so sorry, Mom. I'm so sorry. I reached across the desk and took his hand. I know you are. Now let's figure out how to fix this mess. The next 2 weeks were tense and exhausting. Colette tried calling Damien dozens of times, leaving increasingly angry and threatening voicemails. She showed up at his condo twice, but the new locks kept her out. She went to his office, but his assistant Janet refused to let her past the reception area. And then the messages started arriving at my house. The first one was a letter delivered to my mailbox. No return address, but the handwriting matched samples of Colette's that we'd found online. You poisoned him against me. You couldn't stand to see him happy, so you ruined everything. But this isn't over. I have rights, I have leverage, and you're going to regret interfering in my life. I showed the letter to Margaret, who advised me to keep it but not to respond. The second message was more concerning. I found it taped to my front door one morning, a printout of an article about elderly people in nursing homes with certain passages highlighted. Many seniors lose capacity to make decisions about their own care, and family members can petition for guardianship when elderly parents become unable to manage their affairs. The implication was clear. Colette was threatening to have me declared incompetent. It's an empty threat, Margaret assured me. You're obviously in full possession of your faculties. No judge would grant guardianship based on nothing, but it shows us how she thinks, how she operates. She goes after people's vulnerabilities.
The breaking point came 2.5 weeks after our confrontation in Margaret's office. Damien called me at 11 p.m. on a Thursday night, his voice shaking. "Mom, I need you to come to Portland General Hospital now." My heart stopped. "What happened? Are you hurt?" "No, I'm fine. But Colette is here. She showed up at the ER claiming she was in labor. I got a call from the hospital because I'm listed as the father. Mom, I need you here. I need a witness to whatever happens next." I drove to Portland faster than I probably should have, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles were white. I found Damien in the ER waiting room, looking pale and scared. "What's happening?" "She's back there now. They're examining her. Mom, I don't know what's real anymore. What if the baby is real and I've been treating her horribly based on circumstantial evidence? What if—" "Damien, whatever happens, we'll deal with it, together." We waited for what felt like hours, but was probably only 45 minutes. Finally, a doctor emerged, looking confused and slightly annoyed. "Mr. Thorne, I'm Dr. Williams. I need to speak with you about Miss Marchand." "Is she okay? Is the baby—" "Mr. Thorne, Miss Marchand is not in labor. In fact, Miss Marchand is not pregnant and hasn't been pregnant recently." The waiting room seemed to tilt. "What?" "She came in claiming to be in early labor, but our examination revealed no signs of pregnancy. No fetal heartbeat, no evidence of recent pregnancy in her uterus, nothing. When we confronted her with this, she became agitated and tried to leave, but we needed to rule out other medical emergencies that might be causing her symptoms. It appears that Miss Marchand has been fabricating a pregnancy." Damien sank into a chair, his face in his hands. "Is she still here?" I asked. "She left against medical advice about 10 minutes ago. I'm sorry, Mr. Thorne. I understand this must be shocking news." "Doctor," I said, "would it be possible to get documentation of this examination? We may need it for legal purposes." Dr. Williams nodded. "I'll have the records sent to whatever attorney you specify. Just have them contact our medical records department." After the doctor left, Damien and I sat in that waiting room in silence. Around us, the ER continued its late-night business. A child with a broken arm, an elderly man with chest pains, the ordinary tragedies and emergencies of life. But for us, everything had changed. "It was all a lie," Damien said finally. "From the beginning. The pregnancy, the baby, all of it. She was going to take the house, take whatever money she could get from me, and then what? Claim she had a miscarriage? Disappear? Probably. That's what she did to Marcus Whitfield, according to that police report. I almost gave her everything. I almost forced you out of your home, destroyed my marriage, ruined my career, all for a lie." He looked at me, and there was such devastation in his eyes that I couldn't stay angry anymore. "But you didn't," I said gently. "In the end, you didn't. You saw the truth, and you stopped. Only because you showed me. If you hadn't investigated, if you hadn't pushed back, I would have walked right into her trap. Then we saved each other. I saved you from Colette, and you're going to save yourself by learning from this." We drove home separately, and I spent the rest of the night unable to sleep, processing everything that had happened. Colette had been planning to steal my home, manipulate my son, and destroy my family. And she'd almost succeeded. But almost wasn't the same as actually succeeding. The next morning, Margaret filed for a restraining order on Damien's behalf, citing the threatening voicemails, the hospital incident, and Colette's history of harassment. The judge granted it immediately. Lydia and Damien had a long conversation about their marriage. I wasn't privy to the details, but Lydia told me later that they'd agreed to pause the divorce proceedings and try counseling instead. "I'm not saying we'll definitely get back together," Lydia said.
He hurt me badly, and that's not something I can just forgive overnight. But he was manipulated by an expert, and he's genuinely remorseful. We owe it to 9 years of marriage to at least try. Damien came to my house one Saturday afternoon in early November, when the Oregon rain was falling steadily and the leaves had all turned gold and brown. We sat in my living room, the room where this nightmare had begun, and talked for hours. He apologized for everything, for the cruel words, for trying to take my home, for believing Colette over me, for forgetting who I was and what I'd done for him his entire life. "I don't expect you to forgive me," he said. "I just need you to know that I see now what I did. I see how wrong I was." "I do forgive you," I said, surprising myself. "Not because what you did was forgivable, but because you're my son and I love you. But Damien, our relationship has changed. You can't just say sorry and have everything go back to the way it was." "I know. I'll spend the rest of my life making this up to you if I have to." "You don't have to spend the rest of your life making it up to me. You just have to remember this feeling. Remember what it felt like to almost lose everything to someone who was lying to you. Remember what it felt like to hurt the people who loved you most, and never, ever do it again." As for Colette, she disappeared. The restraining order meant she couldn't contact Damien or come near his home or workplace, but enforcement only mattered if she tried. She didn't. According to Damien's private investigator, yes, he hired one. She'd moved to Sacramento and was already involved with a different man, a recently widowed software executive with significant assets. "Should we warn him?" Damien asked when we learned this. "We already sent an anonymous package with all the documentation to his adult children. What they do with it is up to them. We've done our part." Months passed. Fall turned to winter, winter to spring. Damien and Lydia went to counseling and slowly rebuilt their relationship. Damien got a new job with a different firm, one that appreciated his work ethic and gave him the chance to start fresh. He met with Margaret and officially signed documents removing himself as co-owner of my house, returning full ownership to me. "I don't deserve any part of it," he said when he signed the papers. "This is your home. Dad wanted you to have it. I should never have thought otherwise." One Sunday in April, almost 7 months after this nightmare had begun, I was working in my garden when Damien and Lydia arrived together. They stood at the garden gate, holding hands, looking nervous. "Mom," Damien said, "we have something to tell you." My heart clenched. "What is it?" Lydia smiled, her hand moving to her stomach. "I'm pregnant. Really pregnant this time. We saw the doctor together, and we're due in November." I stood up from my roses, dirt on my knees, and tears in my eyes, and embraced them both. "I'm going to be a grandmother," I whispered. "You are," Lydia said, "and this baby is going to know its grandmother. We're going to make sure of that." That evening, as I sat in my living room, in my house that no one would ever take from me again, I thought about everything that had happened. About Colette's cruelty, about Damien's betrayal, about the moment when everything had seemed lost. But I also thought about Vernon's foresight in protecting me, about Lydia's loyalty, about the stranger who had sent me that anonymous email with the truth about Colette, about Margaret's fierce advocacy, and about my own strength in standing up when it mattered most. Damien told me I was nearly done anyway. He couldn't have been more wrong. At 70 years old, I wasn't done. I was just getting started. I'd survived betrayal, fought off a con artist, saved my son from his worst decisions, and reclaimed my home and my dignity. And I'd learned something important. Age doesn't make you weak or disposable or nearly done. Age makes you wise. It gives you perspective. It shows you what matters and what doesn't, who you can trust and who you can't. I was 70 years old and I'd finished something Damien and Colette had never expected. I'd finished winning. 3 years later, I'm sitting in that same living room, watching my 2-year-old grandson play with building blocks on the floor. His name is Vernon, after his grandfather, and he has his grandmother's gentle nature and his father's, Damien's, stubborn determination. Damien and Lydia rebuilt their marriage stronger than before. He learned from his mistakes, she learned to trust again, and both of them learned the value of family, real family, built on truth and loyalty rather than manipulation and lies.
I've received dozens of letters from people who heard my talks, thanking me for giving them the courage to stand up to family members or caregivers or supposed friends who were taking advantage of them. My favorite letter came from an 80-year-old woman whose son had been trying to convince her to sign over her house to him. She'd attended one of my talks, recognized the patterns I described, and refused. Her son backed down when she showed him she understood her rights. "You saved my home," she wrote, "just like you saved yours." But I didn't just save my home. I saved my self-respect, my dignity, and my relationship with my son. It took work, years of counseling, difficult conversations, and gradual rebuilding of trust, but we made it. Damien stops by every week now, sometimes with Lydia and Vernon, sometimes alone. We have dinner together. We talk about ordinary things. His work, Vernon's milestones, the garden, upcoming holidays, and sometimes when Vernon is napping and Lydia is reading in the other room, Damien and I talk about what happened 3 years ago. "I still can't believe I said those things to you," he told me recently, "that I told you that you were nearly done anyway. Mom, you're the strongest person I know. You've never been nearly done with anything in your life."